Hi, everyone, and welcome back to that UFO podcast. My name is Andy, and my interview today is with a returning guest. And this is one of those guests that is back by popular demand. I had a great time speaking with him. He is Reid Summers, the host of Emergent, a podcast exploring humanity's engagement with non-human intelligence. He directs strategy at the Human Institute, a non-partisan think tank focused on the scientific and policy changes of UAP. And he is also currently developing UFOevidence.com and a whole lot more. This was a great interview. It goes over 2 hours, folks, with some exclusive bonus content at the end for folks who are on the paid platforms for the podcast. Wonderful conversation again with Reid. This could have gone 6 hours easily, but at just over 2 hours. Thank you so much for checking this one out. I'll hand you over now to the interview. And welcome back to the podcast, Reid Summers. Reid, welcome.
Andy, good to be back. Thank you for having me.
By popular demand, Reid, I know I said at the time I was hopeful to have you back on. There was so much we hadn't gotten into, but so many folks, if you go to the YouTube comments and the Patreon comments on X, were like, that Reid was great to listen to, get him back on, so much more to dive into. So great conversation the first time round. People enjoyed it. That's the main thing. And for me, whether it's information, whether it's entertainment, whether it's something in between, if people are thinking, if it gets them thinking, if it brings up new ideas, if it can change opinion, I always think opinion should be fluid, malleable, then that's a job well done. So great to have you back on, and lots to discuss as we kind of battle towards the end of the year. I hope you are warmer where you are than I am. I am in the shed. It is cold. I have a heated blanket on, but I can't feel my feet. But something that has kind of been keeping things warm over the last week is the Age of Disclosure documentary. And I think we have to start there, Reid, because so many people are talking about it. There's so much opinion. I've shared mine quite often. I'd love to know, first off, have you watched the documentary? And if so, what are your thoughts?
I definitely have watched it. I haven't done the fine-tooth comb, but I am prepping a React video and just to kind of share a number of insights that came out for me. High-level comments. I think it had some convincing new voices. The statements by the former FAA head coming out saying he's absolutely certain regarding this phenomenon being a reality, that was impactful. Rep Gallagher's kind of summary 4-option kind of multiple choice regarding it's either for an adversary, it's a robust counter intel program used to cover up the legacy program, it's interdimensional or extraterrestrial or combo of those three. Hint, hint, I believe combo of those three is the more likely. I thought that was impactful. Steve Mnuchin, Department of the Treasury, that he called for this briefing many years ago, a briefing on UAP due to the economic impacts of the president coming to the mic, end quote. Just some impactful original commentary by voices we haven't heard much from. I thought there was also some impactful presentation of the now 6 observables in their more clear dimensions and implications. We can get into that. Again, I've talked about it before, but just another step, another ratcheting in this shift from the discussion of UAP to NHI, from craft to controller. I did find notable in this documentary that there was no real need to kind of present the prosaic options at this point. They went right to the intelligence behind UAP being of non-human origin. So that was a forward step. I had definitely some frustration with the presentation of the narrative arc of the story, how the film was put together. It did have moments where it felt a bit like lobbying, like strategic disclosure, not public disclosure. A factional set of statements than one more all-encompassing for the public. I also think the story told of the post-2017 era was not truly the whole story and may not have wholly been the true story. And so some concerns about kind of the shaping of that narrative. But my focus is more on the species level set of considerations arising from NHI specifically. And so I understand there's a fight to protect oneself against, legal implications, career, access to power, et cetera. I get that that's a component. It's not really my angle or my focus. But I did see some notable coverage of this in the mainstream. that was very favorable. That definitely appears to have shifted. This appears to have shifted once again into a more of a mainstream kind of Overton window, where we can talk about not just UAP as craft, nuts and bolts, but the intelligence behind the craft. And David Grush's interview on Fox News, I felt, was an even further forward and leading edge. David Grush used the statement, the biological sentience that pilots these craft that does not necessarily look like you or I. And
Mm.
when asked if he had seen the photos, he says, or if there are photos, he says, yes, there are. So some definite leading edge statements about bodies, biologics, deceased entities, and in general, the intelligence and the intent behind the phenomenon.
Yeah, I mentioned in the introduction before we started this interview that our previous conversation, if people hadn't caught it, largely focused on that non-human intent. That was the
Mm-hmm.
angle of conversation we were coming at, and we went all over with that, and we'll go back into that in this. But just to start off then on Age of Disclosure, you're the first person I've spoken to. I was on the Psychoactivo podcast with Pavel. I know you've been on there recently.
Mm-hmm.
Really good to
Yep.
talk to him just after I'd watched the documentary. But you're the first guest I've had on to speak to about it, and I'm still kind of forming my opinion. You make some great points.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I'm still stuck at, and I'd be really happy again, like folks, like I say, to speak to Reed here, and my opinion change and form as the conversation goes along. Um, I'm still unsure who exactly the documentary is for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think consensus seems to be, from what I've read online, from the comments on my own socials and elsewhere, there's nothing in it that's new. Largely, it's what we know in
Right.
terms of the story. It is the 2017 to 2024 story, given when it was recorded. Um, I think it stops short of being a public education piece. Other than a
Mm-hmm.
few moments, you mentioned the six observables piece. I did say with Pavel and on my own reaction video, I enjoyed that. I wish there was more of that during it. Almost that
Mm-hmm.
elementary school stop. Okay, so we've brought this topic up. Let's just take 30 seconds or a minute to tell you a little bit more about this, why this is important. They do that with the observables. They give some really nice context and examples and comparisons between, we have a jet that can go 4,000 miles per hour. That's our fastest craft. We have clocked
Mm-hmm.
UAP going 40,000 miles per hour plus. So things like that help paint that picture. I don't think that happens enough. There's not enough discussion of,
Mm-hmm.
here's the go fast, the gimbal footage. Just briefly, here's what you're seeing and here's why it's important, as opposed to it just being a blurry UFO video. So I don't know how you feel around that, and you've maybe touched on it with the narrative or the arc of the story. But
Mm-hmm.
who do you feel this documentary is actually for?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I knew right off the bat that this would not satisfy the UAP community. It certainly would not feel like a win, let alone a hit out of the park. I mean, let's be honest. There are individuals formerly on the legacy program who are coming forward, running for cover, legal cover, who are trying to state clearly and on the record that they are disclosure, that they are disclosing, and that they are part of disclosure. And I think there is some of that at play. I think the audience might have been, in part, the executive branch, Congress, putting pressure on elected leaders to say more, given that former acting department heads, and now, with Rubio, acting Secretary of State, coming on a documentary like this and saying these things would put pressure on elected leaders to take action. I think so. Executive branch, the elected government, the legislative branch of government. The I think the program itself was audience for this. This was an airing out of basically a nonstop interview with key voices on a very carefully lit stage with a lot of strategic kind of unveiling of personal perspective. But after that, kind of, this is what I saw, this is what it is, balls in your court, right? So kind of a dumping off, it felt to me. There wasn't much of an effort to tell a story. I did see, just in the kind of the creative aspects of the documentary, music was at a minimum. It was super quiet. The voices were super toned up. It was mostly Lou Elizondo and Jay Stratton. all the narration was either Lou or Jay.
Hmm.
There was no kind of third narrator, no kind of like angle of critique. And then, the interviewee kind of
Yeah.
voices their argumentation in response. It was just kind of like a nonstop expose of personal eyewitness belief, statement, and argumentation as to what should be done about it. So it did have that strategic disclosure, strategic kind of communication in mind. I think, if anything, the fourth audience might be the mainstream media, basically just giving them material with which to write articles like the 8 reasons you should believe aliens exist out of Variety magazine,
Yeah.
or the Bill Mayer interview, right?
Yeah.
A reality check. So I think, part of it was grist for that mill. I don't know if it was really an effort to really educate and onboard the public.
So let me play devil's advocate then, and this is what I'm still trying to work through myself. It, I love documentaries. I love UFO documentaries, good, bad, and indifferent. I just feel if this is indeed a documentary aimed at the executive branch, the program, the folks who are making decisions, policymakers, is a documentary the best way to do that? That takes you the best part of 3 years. I don't see what's accomplished in this format that can't or wouldn't already have been done, and I suppose that worries me slightly. If this
Mm-hmm.
documentary is so important in that sense, have these conversations not been happening behind closed doors? We keep hearing whistleblowers are going in and out of offices at
Mm-hmm.
Congress and the Senate. We know Grush is behind the scenes now, which I think is a lot of folks see that as incredibly hopeful and positive. Um, I am just a little unsure why the conversations we see surface level commentary, even though Jay Stratton makes the kind of claim, and it was in the trailer, often discussed, I've seen non-human bodies, I have seen non-human craft. That's very surface level because he can't go into detail, but he
Right.
could go into detail in skiffs and with people with the right clearances. I would have thought that would have been happening and already done in the background. So I'm a little wary that this
Mm-hmm.
documentary's had to be pieced together and shown publicly for that to happen. And I suppose just let me just end the rant with this comparison. Is it then perhaps similar to Skywatcher, where a lot of rumor is that Skywatcher do one thing publicly, but
Mm-hmm.
their message, the whole organization is set up as a message to the folks in the background to say, we can do this, we are going to do this, what we are going to do, so bring us in and work together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm still unsure on the purpose of the documentary.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot going on in this documentary. I mean, watch the eyes. There was so much more that these individuals know and are at work doing than they can speak to. Yeah, I mean, this was a heavily over teleprompted documentary as well. I mean, Jay Stratton, it appeared to me, was essentially reading from a teleprompter the whole time. And I do understand that these individuals are walking careful lines. There's a lot they
Yeah,
can't say. Um, Although Eric Davis seems to be willing to cross those lines frequently and
he
kind of
did.
spill the
Yeah.
beans, which there was some real eye opener. I have a list of eye openers from this documentary we can get into.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think a media product like this is a signaling effort, right? It's might be an attempt to place oneself in a certain position within the disclosure narrative. I mean, to release a documentary saying the age of disclosure when there are individuals in it who were literally part of the age of cover up to precede it, we have to question, who's getting kind of brought in, brought on board, on this new vessel, sailing from the old world to the new world. Well, some people want to get on board. They want to get off the old ship, knowing that it's either going down or that crimes have been committed, and you might be liable for those if you don't kind of come out and win the public, or at least signal which side of the fence you're on. So I think there's signaling, there's one's place in the disclosure narrative. There is creating political cover possibly for these backdoor conversations to come front curtain. So some sort of kind of media stage that allows a former acting head to go from a skiff to making statements in front of the public about the intelligence and the intent of the phenomenon. So how does it shift, right? How do you get out of the skiff? It's a question. Once you're inside a skiff, things don't leave that space. And so is the documentary kind of a limited hangout, right, with the public, which is we're going to air a little bit of this out. We're going to test some talking points. We're going to see what the appetite is to entertain certain possibilities. We're not necessarily trying to make the case for or to present original data or footage, which was totally lacking in the documentary.
Yeah.
So it was positional and strategic, and I might add potentially factional in its kind of narrative approach.
And on that narrative approach, do you think that, and that this is just a logical thing for me, I'm not saying this is anything conspiratorial or malicious or whatever, but the fact that Dan Farah, Lou Elizondo, and Jay Stratton are tied up with various book deals and media rights deals and whatnot already. Dan Farah was part of the Lou Elizondo autobiography deal, but that was mentioned back at the time, I think, when Lou's book was mentioned. Um, do you feel Elizondo and Stratton had a large say in what this documentary was going to be, why it was going to be, and that's why it is the way it is? And when I spoke to Pavel, he mentioned he felt there was a lot missing from the documentary, a lot of talking heads. He mentioned Jacques Vallée, Tom
Yeah.
DeLonge. I can get
Mm-hmm.
at least one of those. I thought, oh, Jacques Vallée, actually, that is probably notable now by his absence. Tom DeLonge, I can
Mm-hmm.
understand why not, but he is a big part of where this has gone. But then I could understand why you maybe wouldn't have Tom DeLonge in that cast of characters. I think he stands out in a different way.
Right.
He's then the punk rock guy, as opposed to, yeah, but look what he's done. It's a story for a
Yeah.
different time. So perhaps that's a reason for the narrative.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. The onstage talent looked quite carefully selected. I wouldn't say totally so. I think there was a variety of voices from slightly differing angles and perspectives. So I don't have any window in on Dan Farah's process, the creative license he had or didn't have, who was really driving the script. I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding, right? There's a lot of clues in terms of how the film was composed that would suggest who is the leading voice per this film, who is the champion, who's the patriot, the hero. What are the kind of associations being made with historical figures, Winston Churchill, for example, with individuals in the present? Is that a fair association to make? So I mean, any film is a highly intentional, crafted communication. It's going to omit, it's going to include, and so I think that was very much at play. And is this our disclosure or their disclosure? Is it public disclosure or strategic disclosure? I mean, this to me, this is why we're here on this podcast. This is behind the work I do, is empowering citizens to have real agency in the shaping of this conversation, as well as to get it outside the context of the U.S. military, national security industrial space. So, I mean, it can't just be former U.S. DoD, IC, and federal elected leadership voicing this. Where's the international dimension, right? And if we frame this as us and our foreign adversaries, right, we're already framing this in a competitive kind of way that predisposes us to the exact thing that's being disclosed, which is this multi-decade secret arms race over technologies of non-human origin. So I think this is it's another step. I don't know how much we can expect, to be honest, from the various individuals who have had their fingers deep in this pie for a very long time. They can take the baton so far. We expect almost the U.S. government and the defense industry and its ancillaries to do disclosure on behalf of humanity, right? And I think that is a false authority syndrome. The U.S. military industrial complex is exactly that. It is militarized, it is industrial, and it is inherently defensive. And that cannot be the entity that effectively brings this into the right framing, the right discourse. So it's like, in some ways, I'm happy to take the baton from where this left it, and then gather the citizen, the willing, the able, and to take disclosure further. So I think citizen disclosure and the international angle really is where we have to kick off from this.
I don't think we spoke last time when we did discuss non-human intent around how a non-human intelligence, how much it's involved in our world right now, how much it would know,
Mm-hmm.
how deep that goes. There are theories and hypotheses that any kind of aliens looking in, non-human species, perhaps if we found out too much, would unveil themselves. And the reason for some of the secrecy and keeping a distance is because we don't know, the public at large don't know, the truth hasn't been revealed to them. I
Mhm.
wonder how much a documentary like this, when you have all these military folks, these politicians, these government officials, these contractors coming out and saying what they're saying, is the lack of any reaction from an NHI a sign that they don't care, they don't have that level of awareness? Because we're not
Mhm.
too far off of a president level announcement when you get to a point of having a
Yes.
documentary like this. So,
Yes.
what's your take on that? And I'm wording that question so
Mm.
badly, but I think you get the gist of it.
It's okay. Got it. Yeah. Well, yes, we've heard time and time again, and we heard on this very documentary, this is Eric Davis. Why the cover up? Because they don't want to tell anyone about the threat because they can't do anything about it. We've heard that before. So, is the very contents of the disclosure itself what makes disclosure so extraordinarily challenging? And we have to honestly ask ourselves, what are the contents? What is this disclosure? That changes everything. So, as for NHI, or let me back up, intelligent UAP operating with intelligent kind of behavior and activity, responding to disclosure events, I took due note after the last hearings of 2024. And in the space between that and the inauguration, we saw this anomalous drone activity went worldwide, right? And from what I've heard on the sidelines, some percentage of that activity was very clearly non-prosaic. I think there was also prosaic craft involved, and that's where I go back to Rep Gallagher's kind of four options. And hint,
Hmm.
hint, it's the number fourth. It's the combo of all of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is probably a likely explanation, but it is possible that some kind of a psychological operation was being conducted in the skies after those hearings, prior to this administration forming, with its stated intent to disclose information to the public on UAP in a way that had never been done before. Right, a lot happening there. And we did see intelligent, non-prosaic, craft operating in the skies, doing anomalous and dangerous things, and that continues up to this day. The Dutch government shot down or attempted to shoot down multiple drone-like craft as of a week or two ago, right,
Yeah.
flying over restricted airspace. So there is a fight in the skies. It is kinetic, and from what I know and have understood to be the case, the U.S. government and possibly some of its Western allies are in a not just a secret arms race with foreign adversaries, but in a secret um, state of, you could call it a cold war with the phenomenon itself, and that is behind what we see in these UAP shoot downs, but also what's behind some of the UAP altercations with craft in the air and some of the more dangerous elements of how the human population is being engaged.
Yeah, I wonder, one of those big explosions of UAP, and I'll give a nod to my friend Graham Rendell here, wonderful author, wonderful historian on the Foo Fighters phenomenon,
Mm-hmm.
was when during World War One, World War Two, they were seeing these orbs, these craft would appear, and it seemed like they were everywhere, all across the world, um, as we were filling the skies with all kind of planes and jets and weaponry. Would it make sense then, perhaps? And I've been a little bit outspoken on the whole drone situation. I think a lot of that was a mass hysteria or people just posting stuff online for clicks and views and engagement. I do think
Mm-hmm.
there were some interesting incidents, but a very, very low percentage of what was covered would have actually been. However, if the US, if China, if Russia are now filling the skies with all these weird and wonderful toys, no longer
Right.
your standard aircraft, you've got all these different size of drones, different power sources in these
Right.
drones. Are some of these drones perhaps nuclear powered? They're using maybe some kind of energy that allows them to travel
Mm-hmm.
longer, further, unnoticed. Is that attracting the phenomenon? And is that perhaps
Mm.
why we're seeing these flaps? And it's
Yeah.
almost like going back to those days of World War One, World War Two.
Yeah, I mean, as you say that, I ask, where did that tech come from? Are we
Mm.
actually seeing the latter stages of not only the reverse engineering efforts, but the deployment of those technologies and the weaponization of them at scale,
Yeah.
and in a way that is causing a potential catastrophic miscalculation between superpowers? So I think, Are we seeing the late stage results of what you could call technological seeding or even Trojan technologies? And, in the documentary, Hal Puthoff, finally somebody posed the question, maybe crash retrievals are not retrievals of crashes, but the retrievals of intentionally deposited technologies. He called it a gift. Maybe it's a giant IQ test for the species. Look, here's a toy. Let's see who reverse it. Let's see
I like
who
the
can,
IQ test idea. I really like that.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, and who can take it the farthest. Now, there's a little bit of a red herring there. Gift. People say, "Oh, it's a gift. Great, it's a gift. We're done." It's a benevolent contribution to human development. It's like, is it a giant IQ test to see who the best partner would be, right? Who could pair with the technological, superstructure that whatever this intelligence is bringing here would want us to pair with? Who can get to AGI first? Who's the best human partner? I think there is selective engagement and engagement in very unique and specific ways with different national and defense entities historically, which does suggest an interest in kind of centers of human power. And, as it's been said, I think Harold Malmgren, this is from him, that there's an intense interest in our quote tip of the spear technologies in both amplifying and accelerating and maybe shifting the direction of how those are developed, but also creating something of a glass ceiling to limit how far we go. Some have posited that maybe we pose a threat to them. In fact, that was one of the top lines in the promo to this documentary is maybe we are threatening them. I scoff at that, right? We are in no position to threaten other life in an interstellar fashion, right? It would take how long to get a nuclear warhead out of our own solar system, right? Where's Voyager right now? Okay, not even
Yeah.
not even a hair's breadth close to the next star system. Can we threaten the planet that might be of interest to them? Now that's a much more plausible scenario. So are we threatening an ecology that is of interest to other forms of sentient and biological life that value ecologies? Now that is, I think, a very fruitful line of thinking.
Yeah, when I heard the IQ test idea from Hal Puthoff, it made me think of Men in Black and that interview process Will Smith goes through, where you've got all these top quality graduates from various academies across the United States, and they're all
Mm-hmm.
sitting trying to fill in the form, and
Mm-hmm.
clearly all very qualified, but he just thinks a little bit differently. And that's the
Yeah.
guy that gets picked. And I wonder, is it a case of you've got this technology? It's not as simple as you've got the engineering capabilities, you can reverse engineer it. You have to think outside the box. You have to think differently. There may be elements of luck in discovering whatever it is we have to discover.
Mm-hmm.
But I did like that idea. You mentioned you had a list of eye openers. Do you want to go through some of those? Because I think that'd be quite good to
Yeah,
discuss.
yeah. Well, and just on to finish up that last comment, I
Mm,
think we might be seeing um, the deployment of an interstellar form of flypaper operation, right? Which is you put the tech here, you see who it attracts, you see who's smart enough to crack the code. You know, direct quote out of the documentary: "Whoever cracks the code first, right, is in a position of tremendous supremacy."
mm,
And so, what is the NHI's interest in having one actor crack the code over another? Obviously, they deposit this tech, whether it's in a Trojan or a gifted form or a transacted form. We have to ask the question: has there been a transaction, a deal been made to gain technology in exchange for something? Um, Ultimately, that's going to play out in all too predictable ways, right? We humans will fight over it. So what is an NHI kind of a yeah a strategic use of the depositing of technology for that end? What would they want to see it weaponized, militarized? Because it will be. Do they want to see one, national player rise over others? Because one will. So it's a question of, what kind of intelligence would be doing this, knowing the outcomes will be what they are. So I think, yeah, getting into the intelligence and beginning to look at some of its patterned activity is a really important thing. But yes, let's talk about eye openers. Well, man, Eric Davis, somebody put a microphone in front of him and give him 3 lattes and just don't stop recording, because 1964, Holloman Air Force Base, 3 UAP, non-human entity deboarded the craft, interacted with an Air Force and CIA personnel. I'm quoting the documentary. 1989, a Soviet Tic Tac recovery, 4 non-human bodies, humanoid aliens. Soviet scientists took apart craft, and if I had glasses on, I would take them off, and discovered an advanced directed energy weapon.
Yeah.
How interesting. And what does that even mean? They discovered an intact weapon. They discovered technologies that could be weaponized into a directed energy weapon. The weapon was used in some fashion against US military, I'm sorry, Soviet personnel, but I've also heard tell of UAP using directed energy weapons against US military personnel, not only craft, but on individual service members on the ground. So what is the DEW UAP connection? That interesting. I think there was a big hint at some point in the documentary that some of what we're seeing is the result of a Chinese reverse engineering program. Not a huge surprise to those of us who've been thinking along those lines, but to say so on a national platform. Interesting that Kennedy's comments were spliced right in between these. This quote from him: "There are new technologies to be won, and technology has no conscience of its own." Right. So, was the fight for these technologies already well underway, and was the arms race even at play during the Cold War? Was the Cold War, as we understand it, between the Soviets and the Americans, was it in part fueled by technologies that were transacted for following the 1947 Roswell crash, following whatever engagements might have taken place in the early 50s between governments, plural, US and China, and non-human, humanoid extraterrestrial entities, right? This is the territory we're now in. And then finally, sorry, but there's just so many from Eric. My God, he did state the following quote: "To intervene and protect and prevent a conflict between us and them," and I believe them meaning not human on human, but us and them.
Yeah.
And I have heard statements made, come across information to suggest that there may be some sort of dominant NHI faction and an outlaw or rogue NHI faction, and that one is operating under some degree of permission by the other and restriction by the other, but that it might be doing things in rogue fashion that are a direct threat. So I've come across information to that regard, and so some of these statements comport pretty well.
Yeah. Is there an element? I touched on this on my reaction video to the documentary, and it gets a little bit I don't even have to preface this statement because this whole thing can be
Right.
seen as conspiratorial. I get that, but have we gone to war or invaded? I say we humans invaded country to
Mhm.
country, big nation, small nation, thinking Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Taiwan, Ukraine, because potentially there have been times where big country, US, China, Russia, know that smaller country, it's not oil, they have not weapons of mass destruction, but they have a gifted or a crashed craft somewhere,
Mhm.
and they can't just go in and get it. So how
Mhm.
do we go in and get that bit of technology? And quite often you'll see China backing up country A, but other country wants to go in and get that. And is that part of it where these superpowers are trying to almost collect the Infinity Stones? And
Yeah.
it's
Right.
that kind of fight for technology.
Right. Yeah, going out and hunting down the lost seeing stones of Numenor,
Mm,
and aggregating them under one's own control. Well, John Robert, I think believe that was his name, in the documentary, made a statement that they would prefer if the UAP crashed in international waters, right?
mm,
But I gathered from that, and I've heard elsewhere, it's no problem if it doesn't, right? There is an SLA, a service level agreement, in the defense industry regarding the recovery of crashed vehicles anywhere on Earth, and it can be done in under 100 hours. So anywhere on Earth, vehicle crashes, it can be recovered no matter where. Just think about that for a minute. What kind of infrastructure it would take, airports, military personnel, diplomatic cover to go into the suburbs of Moscow and pluck out of a farm field, a
mm.
crashed vehicle, right? So, but yes, it's an important question, which is in what we've seen in the 20th century. To what extent was the non-human presence, let just presence, not even intent or activity, a factor in generating or fueling hostilities, human on human? And this technological arms race, how far back does it go? Where is its inception? And we've heard alarming statements over the last several years I'm thinking again of Harold Malmgren, that, I believe it was the 1962 test of a nuclear high altitude blast in the Johnston Atoll was stated as a test of a nuclear warhead, but its actual purpose, which might have been one of many dual purposes, was to test the triggering of a directed energy blast that could take down a UAP. And a UAP did fall out of the nuclear plume and was recovered, and including the bodies, which he then was given firsthand knowledge to. So, to what extent have our activities in terms of genetic testing and profiling, mapping the human genome, has that at all been impacted by or dual purposed toward detecting genetic anomalies in the human population as a result of non-consensual physical engagements or medical experimentation by NHI, right? These far-flung Cold War conflict zones, right? Was there a crashed vehicle or technology being developed by a second or third rate country and we had to have it and they wouldn't give it? I don't know of anything specific to that regard myself, but I think it's a plausible scenario.
You mentioned just before, and I want to pull you back because it's the kind of thing back in the day I would have been screaming at a podcast host or radio host to ask for more information on. You touched on, and forgive me paraphrasing, that potentially humans fighting with NHI and knowing something around that. What sort of hearsay have you heard? What's your thoughts on the idea that we are engaged in almost a secret conflict with an
Yeah.
NHI or a faction of an NHI?
Yep. Well, I would say there's more than 5, less than 10 different multiracial groups operating on Earth. That's what I've heard, and I've heard it credibly stated, and with some convincing data to back it up. I wouldn't be surprised if different groups are seeking different partners in a at times competitive, at times collaborative fashion between each other, which means to say we're not looking at an overt war, exopolitical proxy war. We're looking at a competitive engagement, right? And so different groups engaging, different world actors, but also collaborating with one another for shared ends. Yep, I'm aware of some instances of UAP hostily engaging aircraft in the sky. I think of the Coin helicopter incident, as well as the 2004 Sicily helicopter incident. Very similar, a directed energy weapon targeting a helicopter and forcing it to either land, emergency landing, or to actually relocate it physically in the air. And then, aircraft disappearances, the Frederick Valentich disappearance, the Kinross disappearance. So there are some instances, actually a couple of those are right out of your book, Andy, which is behind you. And if I may, I have it right here as well. So it's
free
good stuff.
advertising. Look at that.
I know. Look at that. Earned media.
Was that
no,
Atlas
but
of UFOs you've just held up? Because some folks will be listening to this, and of course, that's available. Read on Amazon, Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, and other retailers. But yeah, thanks for showing that.
You're welcome. Yeah, I like coffee table books because, believe it or not, I actually have a coffee table still.
Nice.
So this is on the coffee table. So when folks come over, they're like, "Oh, the Atlas of wow," and thus begins the UFO conversation. Which,
Cheers, mate.
yeah, good stuff. But yeah, there have been in the historical record, instances of hostile engagement in the air, UAP in some kind of apparent dogfight, or chasing one another. Even Skywatcher has anecdotally reported that different classes of UAP seem to be kind of engaging each other and possibly chasing each other off. And then, of course, we have the whole historical record of people being engaged in these alleged abductions. And I think that's highly alarming. And, taken across the sweep of history with all the signals and indicators, I would say there is definitely a there. And, I'll just say, I think the big shift right now is going from, is there a there, UAP, to is there a they there? Is there an intelligence, a sentience, a mind? And is it engaging us? And if it is, we have to go beyond the nuts and bolts of the phenomenon to look at the dimensions of relational engagement, communication, communion of body and mind, direct physical encounters. That's literally where we are. Those are the front lines of the conversation. And so is there a they there? There are multiple theys there. Are they not just in existence, but are they physically present? I think the age of disclosure, if nothing else, it advanced us beyond existence to presence. But now the next question is activity and intent. We have to get into those dimensions. And to do that, we have to look at the full record, including the citizen testimonial record. Right? There are tens of thousands of citizens globally across decades in all different kind of creative, cultural, and political and religious environments, stating that they have had similar encounters with similar class beings. And so to look at those patterns and trends is really important right now. And, you know, among those, there are anecdotal reports of U.S. military personnel being attacked on the ground. I've heard more than one instance of that taking place during a crash recovery. So during a crash recovery, service members are down on the ground recovering elements of the vehicle, and another craft approaches the space and fires a weapon and causes loss of life. So, I mean, that, okay, you know, I can't prove that. I don't have evidence or hard proof of that, but, you know, comported to other things like the Colares incidents in Brazil, which continue to this day, there, you know, individuals in rural areas of South America are reporting laser-like injuries by UAP in remote areas where we have the least detecting capabilities. That's alarming if that's taking place. So I think we have to advance beyond, you know, novel curiosity about, you know, luminous objects and interstellar possibilities, and confront the fact that we're being physically engaged by another biology with massively greater technological capabilities than our own.
You mentioned right at the beginning of that answer that you had been exposed to data which backed up some of that. What sort of data, and how do you get exposed to that?
Just in conversations. I mean, people reach out to me all the time, and I do my due diligence to make sure people are who they say they are. But yeah, I mean, what they've been able to share suggests that, you know, this is not all love and light, that there is some sort of hostile altercation taking place, at least between some governments and some NHI factions. And so, no, I've not been exposed to classified information, photos, videos, etc. You know, but, you know, other information, and a lot of it is in the public domain as well, hard to find. Do a good deep ChatGPT search and you might find some of it. You know, definitely suggests that there's a kinetic engagement taking place. And, you know, Ross Coulthart speaks to it often on his show. And if anyone wants to know the dimensions of it, go talk to Ross, because I think he's hearing it in spades, which is, you know, we are using high wave microwave pulse weaponry to down UAP. Prosaic, you know, rockets and missiles are being attempted to shoot down UAP, and they're not working. It's been a long and complex dance over many decades to gain some technological parity with the phenomenon, to confront its activities, to redress its potential violations and its transgressions of whatever agreements might have been made. And you know, it's not a pretty picture. And so when Lou Elizondo and others say, you know, there's a hard truth behind all this, right? It's ugly, that it has festered, it has gone too far, it cannot stay secret any longer. It has exceeded its shelf life as a secrecy. I understand what he's talking about.
When I spoke to Pavel on Psychoactivo, like I mentioned last couple of days ago, actually, he mentioned, he was asking me about my book, and I'm not going to plug it again, folks. But he did ask anything I learned about it, anything I thought was interesting as I kind of researched the book. And I mentioned the fact that, you know, Pavel being, you know, the whole South American connection, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, there are often more, it seems to me, cases that turn violent or have a link to death. We know with Colares, they were shooting beams through the roof and blood was seen traveling through the air. The iron was being removed from blood. People were badly injured. Rumors of fatalities. You mentioned crash retrieval fatalities. And does that point or give some more evidence to the idea of factions being involved? Could it be that the reason you get more direct contact with humans in South America is it's because there are a particular faction, or NHI has more prevalence in that area? Maybe there are perhaps different NHI prevalent in North America. You then have Europe and whatnot, and they maybe have domain in certain areas. Would that make sense?
I think it would be, yeah, it would be plausible at this point. I mean, the altercations might have began, the year after 1947, the Mantell incident. The first death of a U.S. Air Force service member in a plane crash as a result of a UAP potential chase and encounter. So I mean that sets the tone, right? I don't think this was, you know, kind of like this benevolent meeting of two different intelligences and this kind of proverbial White House lawn landing where we greet them, they greet us. It hasn't been that from the beginning, and so um, I think the phenomenon. It's plausible to imagine the phenomenon has adapted to a number of things: the shifting nature of global power and global alliances post World War II, our increased ability to detect and to track UAP as a technological ability, which still remains, from what I understand, limited, but is growing. Our ability to, I suppose, reverse engineer some of these craft and to produce a viable ARV, right? That can be used in a variety of operations. I don't know the extent of what those would be. And so has whatever this presence been, has it shifted in terms of where it is physically engaged and with what populations it is engaged, that it would appear and begin to concentrate in places of poorer detectability? I would not be surprised. That it would go from daylight encounters to nighttime? I would not be surprised. That it would operate out of the ocean as never before, because we're sandwiched between two enigmatic domains, we terrestrial mammals, space and sea, right? We have almost no observing capabilities in either. Tim Gallaudet in the documentary, we have mapped to greater spatial resolution the moon and Mars than we have the ocean seafloor, right? So just about anything could be operated from down there. So I think we do need to be looking for changing patterns in UAP activity, which could be a responsiveness to human technological developments, and again, the shifting balance of power. If the Western Liberal Alliance has been more adversarial toward these NHI factions, if China, North Korea, others have been more receptive, that's a problem. Could that then fuel hostilities on the ground, tech, data, AI arms races, right? Even trade wars, right? What's really underneath the skin of human affairs? I think the non-human presence is a factor, and I think kind of responsibly examining and speculating, because that would be required. We do not have enough hard data to know what the phenomenon is doing in North Korea or China or Russia, let alone even more allied countries, Italy, Australia, right? And so it is the world's best kept secret. So we shouldn't underestimate the level of the secret keeping and how global it truly is. But I think we as citizens need to begin asking the question: what is the NHI connectivity to certain events in the world? Are they influencing those events? Are they holding certain things back? Are they propelling certain things forward? I'm thinking mainly about technology.
Yeah, apologies, I had to look down there, folks. My heated blanket had turned itself off, and it's incredibly cold in the shed. So sorry about that, Reed.
No worries.
I have asked you one question from my actual notes for this interview so far, and we are almost 50 minutes in. So I do want to get to some of those listener questions again. But just before we do, one of the things that have come, and I'll just state again for the record, folks, if I sound at all overwhelmingly negative about the Age of Disclosure documentary, I genuinely am not. I just think the documentary itself is perhaps lesser than the sum of the parts or what are going to come from it. I think it's going to be the
Right.
impact afterwards, hopefully, that gains momentum. Dan Farah has been on Joe Rogan, where I think there will be more people, it's a very obvious statement, more people will see Dan Farah clips from Joe Rogan than they will watch the Age of Disclosure documentary, because of the size of the audience Rogan gets and that mainstream reach and the clips and the way social and viral feeds work. But they mentioned around something potentially by the end of the year, Donald Trump making a statement. David Grush, we mentioned the interview David Grush done on Fox with Brett Baer. He mentions or alludes to the fact, I'll let the administration make that statement as and when they want to. I have just interviewed, as we record this, about 2 hours ago, Representative Eric Burleson, and I asked him what his thoughts were on the likelihood that Donald Trump would be the president to make that statement. I don't think he seemed overly positive that he would, and that there is more on the desk and more on the plate or the mind of Donald Trump right now when it comes to various wars in different countries, the affordability crisis in the United States and whatnot. And I can understand that. As big as the UAP question is the question
Mhm.
for humanity, it will affect us forever. It changes everything once it's answered. However, what's your take on Trump being likely to make that statement or not? Um, and does it matter at this point?
I think it would matter. I mean, we do need increased federal authorities from some government, some acting authority to state, at least to affirm existence and presence. I think, I wouldn't take it to the bank. I wouldn't build upon that likelihood. I think it's very likely it does not happen. And that's where I'm already thinking out ahead of it, and irregardless of it. Because if the citizen conversation does not happen, there's really no grounds upon which there's no political value or strong footing to make statements like that if the public is totally ill prepared for the ramifications. So getting the public ready for the ramifications, if that's anyone's calling, get on board because it has to happen. Um, I'm hopeful. I know everyone has talked about Donald Trump and his administration being, quote, the disclosure president. From what I understand, there were many efforts made early on to advance that issue, up the laundry list of issues politically that this administration has stated they want to address. This seems to be there's been a turn away from doing that early on in the administration. Would the president throw that out there in his last kind of lame duck months as president when there's less to lose? And of course, there's a lot of political value to be gained from not only disclosing the phenomenon, but mostly disclosing the cover up and naming the other political party as the prime, you know, source or cause or gatekeepers of that cover up. So there's risk there as well. How will this disclosure be framed? Who's the bad actor? Where's the center of controversy? So if one party is going to, nail the other and say that they're the ones who have gate kept this more or less or mostly, then that's a very toxic political move to make with an issue that really pertains to the whole species, to all of
Mm.
humanity. But at a gut level, in terms of how am I sensing the changing weather and the wind, I'm thinking of something occurring in the mid to late 2027, 2028 timeframe. I think that's something to be thinking of. I would be highly surprised if anything happens this year. Yeah, I would be very surprised.
Why do you
But
say
other than that,
27, 28? Why that date range?
good question. There's been so much conversation about the long, the often mentioned 2027,
Hmm.
with regards to some sort of geopolitical event, a natural event, planetary event, something with the solar cycle of our sun. There's so much speculation out there. I personally think that a conflict between the U.S. and China is essentially looming and may happen a whole lot sooner than we all think. And I would not be at all surprised if disclosure is a reason that conflict happens sooner. Okay, so Xi Jinping has told the People's Liberation Army of China to be ready to invade Taiwan. This is a statement of readiness, not a statement of intent to invade.
Hmm.
I believe it's either 2026 or 2027, might be 27. Um, from some of the signals that I'm reading, I think the move might be made sooner than that. And I honestly think if the US government moves to disclose this phenomenon, I'm not sure other foreign adversaries sit still and follow and play ball.
Yeah.
It's too powerful an issue to aggregate to one's own national narrative. So, likewise, do the Chinese undertake some form of increased transparency? Hard to imagine. They don't seem to be the most transparent in
No.
terms of governance models. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't have any signals as to when or if the administration will actually do this. But at a gut level, I would say, be open to a 2027, 2028 reveal of some kind. Also, be open to the phenomenon doing something. Right? It's not a
Yeah.
neutral actor. It's not all us on us. It's really us and them. And so what do they want to do? How do they respond to events on the ground? By all accounts, the phenomenon itself is not wanting to disclose, at least not on an urgent timescale. But it could, anything could be used to engineer a mass kind of and well-shaped public perception of NHI, whether it's an inbound craft, a signal or communication technologically received from elsewhere in the solar system, or a mass sighting on the ground. So, the phenomenon is at play.
Yeah, 97 was the Phoenix Lights. So 30 years on from the Phoenix Lights event, perhaps they come back and go, we'll have another
Right.
pass at this.
Anniversary, 30-year anniversary.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I've always got an issue with the whole calendar thing because an NHI to be like, yeah, so May 2026, that's when we're going to come along. If you can just mark that down, I don't see how that conversation would ever even occur. One other thing Eric Burleson, Congressman, said to me before was that the Secrets Task Force is going to have to move on at some point from the UAP conversation. He said, and again, you wouldn't have heard this. You wouldn't have heard this yet because I've literally just recorded. But he did say that they have other things to get to, including, I think he said, the Martin Luther King assassination and RFK assassination, and the UAP remit can't stay there forever. And there will be a point they naturally have to say, I think his exact words were, we'll have to shelf it and leave it for other folks to pick up the ball or come along with fresh eyes. And I think that'll be something that disappoints a lot of folk, that they're at some point they're going to have to say the UFO thing, draw a line under it. We have done as much as, and I am presuming this is Burleson, Burchett, Luna. They're going to have to draw a line under it and go, cool, that's as far as we got. We ultimately didn't get where we needed to go, and we have to move on.
Right. Well, you could thank the legacy program for that. You heard it in Burleson and Burchett's and Luna's testimony during the last hearings that certain staffers, unelected individuals in congressional offices, are barring, congressmen and women from having rightful briefings from organizations like Arrow and others. And so the gatekeeping is deep, right? And, I'm not surprised. I'm not really banking on the D-class effort declassing the nature of reality. I just don't think governments do that. So can they create a little bit of a crack that we can leverage and expand into the next, 2 to 5 year timeline? Yeah, I think that's plausible. But, it's inevitable. This is going to have to get outside of the US government and go into other arenas. Retired Colonel Carl Nall has talked about the, quote, end of a cycle since 2017 and how other hands have to pick this up. A new conversation has to begin that's not just a couple former, DOD IC guys coming out with some videos and engineering the government confirmation of those videos and getting a few congressmen to speak on the record and having skiffs. And, if that legislative primary line of attack is not working, what are the other lines of attack? We have to be asking.
Yeah, he was saying to me that when they apply, I was asking around Grush and clearances and trying to get congressmen and senators into skiffs and whatnot. And he says they can apply for clearances and permission, but they are refused, and the refusals can be anonymous, and they don't know who's actually refusing. And he said that also leads, like, where do you chase up? We then don't know exactly where to go to say, okay, we want approval. And so I get there's a lot of frustrations there. But you're right. I think it ultimately will come back to, we can't wait on the government to disclose this. It's going to have to be the phenomenon itself or some kind of citizen's effort, scientific effort. I don't know how that would go.
Yeah, I have some ideas about it, and I'm actually the bulk of my efforts are on those lines of effort. We can get into those. I think there are some interesting possibilities at hand to generate disclosures that no one would have seen coming.
Yeah,
and I think of, for example, imagine the D-class office submits a request to the Brazilian government for a retired general present and under duty during the Colares incidents to come forward in front of Congress and to state on the record what the Brazilian government knows. Would a foreign government submit itself to something of an interrogative or a request for information from an acting U.S. agency, so that it's not the U.S. government disclosing, it's a second or third tier country disclosing. Would that be another viable way instead of,
Mm.
so basically step outside the sphere of influence of the legacy program and all of its assets? And because I do not doubt that there are other governments sitting on information. I mean, even I was said in the documentary Age of Disclosure that the Vatican knows, the Vatican
Mm.
has information. So there are many different actors out there who could provide revolutionary disclosure of information. Um, so, but and then there's the citizen side and the societal side of the effort. And I've been a part of standing up this effort to develop new capabilities of detecting and tracking UAP at a technological level, and to converge those capabilities in one space, create a collaborative framework to get out into the field and to generate really important, credible insight and tactical insight into the activity of UAP. So we can get into that as well.
Yeah, so let's do that before we get to listener questions, because I can separate this into two parts for folks if it goes long. So 2026 UAP Detection and Tracking Summit, very
Mm-hmm.
handily starts in 74 days from now as we record this. Read, I can see that on the website. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what this is, who's involved,
Yeah.
because there are some big names just looking at the website.
Yeah. So this 2-day virtual conference and the whole collaborative framework behind it, and that will continue after it, was devised in the depths of the 2024 drone crisis, when the public needed credible insight into what the hell was flying over cities, coastlines, sensitive infrastructure, and federal and private sector authorities were unable to deliver that credible picture to the public. And so the insight was that society at this point has enough scientific and technical capabilities to functionally detect anomalies in the air and potentially under the oceans in a beginning fashion. And that if we converge those capabilities, if we bring together the 12 or so disparate groups, academic teams, research organizations into one space, converge their capabilities, that we can create a basically a societal UAP detection and tracking effort in the public interest, and generate our own aerial intelligence, our own insight into what is up in the sky above us, and really to anchor into this truth that data drives disclosure. People are unhappy with Age of Disclosure because it's all testimony. There's no data. There's no evidence. Let's go get the data. Let's go get the evidence. It actually is collectible. The phenomenon is either not able or not interested in concealing all of its appearances and all of its detectable signatures, right? So I and the team at the Human Institute, where I'm working, reached out to the dozen or so research and and academic groups that are looking at detection and tracking. We're bringing them all together at this 2-day summit. We have Eric Burleson opening up the summit. We have a number of key voices: James Fowler, formerly of Skywatcher, and we also have the Skywatcher team led by Gary Nolan speaking at the summit. So we have, hopefully bringing forward some key tactical insight into the data gathered thus far, and basically look at how do we systematize and standardize the technologies and the data collection around UAP detection to provide a data set that would ultimately be accessible to the public, to researchers, and yes, to others in the federal space and in the private sector space, but really with a nonprofit framework and governing architecture.
How do you see this then sitting alongside? Because I think something that's on a lot of folks' minds is how many duplications of efforts there seems to be at times. I think one of the
Right.
recent examples would be the whistleblower funds, where you have different folks, whistleblowers themselves, multiple, setting up their own either GoFundMe's or selling coffee or merchandise to try and raise funds for whistleblower
Mm-hmm.
protections, and people have their different ideas on how that looks and whatnot. That's all up in the air for debate. But you've got Sol, you've got the
Yep.
Galileo project, You have the Tedesco brothers, who I know are speaking at the event, doing their work with
Hmm.
Nightcrawler, their own. And I've got the Tedescos back on in a couple of days' time. They were meant to be
Great.
on last week, folks. There was an illness, so we delayed to let them recover. But yeah, so there's potentially a duplication of work. How do you get folks to work together and make sure that you're doing work that, again, isn't treading on other folks' toes, but you're also
Hmm.
benefiting from the work that's already been done by other folks?
Yeah, it's a challenging effort to encourage folks out of their silos, to acknowledge the need for funding in a very resource starved environment. Um, Also to kind of soothe the egos and get people off of this, this platform of wanting to be the one to make the discovery, to get to be the one on CNN and so forth. There's got to be kind of an inspired effort from a deeper level, and that's focused on really the human interest. That this is humanity first, not national security first, not private company and its stockholders first, right? To really move in a humanity first footing. I think there's a lot of will to do that. We have to work out the collaborative framework to do it. I think it's best for society to do that and not other national security entities and agencies. I don't think Arrow should be the organization bringing together all of society's nascent UAP detection and tracking
Mm,
capabilities and pointing all of those ships in the direction of doing the DoD's work, right? We need to be doing the citizens, society's work, and even bigger, working on behalf of an international consensus-based response to these intelligently controlled craft that are operating in ways we don't understand. So it's being worked on as we speak. There is a nascent coalition forming where there could be increased standardization of the technologies being used to detect UAP, increased agreement on what the detectable signatures are, and then go find the tech that can detect them. Hopefully, there's a new appetite to fund these initiatives. And I am encouraged because at least two of the groups speaking at our summit have secured large scale funding for their efforts recently to the tune of millions of dollars, which is excellent. This is what we need. Actually, three groups. I should correct that. So, the private equity is there to support this effort. I think, if anything else, if people are frustrated that the federal government will not facilitate this on behalf of the public interest, then good. Like convert that frustration into conviction to find the ways, the resources, the solutions to move the needle. And this summit is 100% the team's inspiration to move that needle. And great that a variety of organizational leads, congressional reps are willing to step onto that stage and talk about detection and tracking at that level. But it'll be a challenging process to get everyone to work together nicely, and it'll probably have to, like I said, be a nonprofit kind of solution to really deal with this. If there's money involved and money to be made, it's going to be fraught, and always will be.
I'll put the link for the summit in the description for the podcast if people want to click on that and
Yep.
check it out. Like I said, it starts in around 74 days' time, folks. February 7th, Saturday, February 7th. In the UK, that's 3 p.m. To Monday, the 9th of February at 1 a.m. But again, you can adjust that, folks, locally for your own times. That's what, Christ, 10 a.m. Eastern,
Right.
7 a.m. Pacific, So
Yep.
yeah,
2 packed days, 12 sessions, over 23 speakers. There's going to be some brilliant technology demoed and displayed, some early findings from a variety of field research programs, and some hard hitting statements on the need for increased collaboration and oversight by responsible acting authorities to help society move the needle on this. And it's $50 to attend. We set the price nice and low to try to get as much of the public into this event as possible. So yeah, please get on board. Seat space is limited, so I do recommend to people to get a seat soon because we will cap participation.
And Reid, I have to ask because more and more folks expect this now, I think, and it's only fair. When you talk about non-profit and you're asking for
Mhm.
$50 for an event like this, can you just justify why you're looking for the cash from folks to come in
Sure.
and sit on the
It
event?
100%. It costs money to host events of all kinds and to promote them and to get them out to the public. I think, $50 is basically will help us make ends meet. And it is being 100% put on by a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And so those funds also go into our other research efforts that go across the board. We have a series investigating the scientific and research foundations of non-human intelligence. We're building a for the public interest platform to score and present UFO evidence to the public. UFOevidence.com is the website. So everything the Human Institute does is for the public. It is a nonprofit driven enterprise, but there are costs to doing a lot of this. So
Yeah.
tickets are necessary.
Awesome. Thank you for the explanation. Let's dive in then to listener questions, because I got so many in for you, and I try not to duplicate what we discussed last time. So, Reed, from Nick. Nick says, I'm curious to get Reed's thoughts on the summoning aspect of the phenomenon, especially as it relates to the history of esoteric or occult magic rituals. There are notable similarities between what the folks at Skywatcher describe and the writings and practices of John Dee and Aleister Crowley.
Good question. From my study of the phenomenon, the entities the behind this are highly telepathic. They have found ways, neurological and technologically, to break through whatever barrier exists that exists over us currently between mind and higher planes of reality. And so they are able to engage in those higher planes, to traverse them to some extent, to communicate over them. And so that there would be intense interest in certain psi signaling that we could put off in the field is no surprise to me. So the use of psionics to put off a signal, to engage in a bidirectional interface psychically or psionically, I think is being it's being demonstrated. We have yet to see the data on what that looks like and how it works. But anecdotally, it seems to be a real possibility. And I think, we're gaining better insight into the way we function in terms of extrasensory perception, the work with disabled autistics in terms of anticipating, non-visible language and interacting non-verbally and so forth. So, I think it's well within the zone of possibility. Is it within the zone of probability is the question. Increasingly, I would say yes. In the testimonial record with experiencers, a majority, must be a majority, speak of some sort of in the mind engagement where information is given and sent. So, would whatever this intelligence is, would it take an interest in our existing spiritualistic practices where we open the mind to other planes of reality, engage with non-physical entities? Why not? I mean, if that's where we're opening the door and you're capable of going through that door, why would you not want to? Would there even be the promoting of people doing spiritualistic practices, seances, possibly. And I do hear anecdotally that in places of high UAP activity, there are individuals who are promoting the use of those group practices to open up the mind to communicate with other forms of life. And in some cases, that intersects with what are commonly understood as the physical morphologies of NHI. So I mean, are we basically, we're already functioning. We have a foot in both reality, the physical, the non-physical. We just don't account for the non-physical. The engagement is intended to fully engage us, right? And so would NHI circumvent the physical and prefer the psychological or the psi level? I think that's very plausible.
Yeah, I think I look at the idea that perhaps some of these entities are almost administrators for reality, if you want to look at it from like a matrix point of view. Are some of these craft traversing not kind of space and time, but they're just coming through to the computer game? They're entering with the admin, admin for password and username, and they come through. Again, if you like your matrix analogies, are they in the Matrix, Morpheus and the crew? I love the Matrix movies, folks, all of them. Not the fourth one, that doesn't exist. Just the first three, the trilogy and the anime. But the idea that they're coming through and freeing people from the Matrix and taking them through to the real world, is there an element of UFO sightings or experiences are to kind of free people's minds a little bit, and it can't all be done at once? It has to be done in small numbers. But yeah, the summoning aspect of it's a strange one. There's a lot of different questions that arise for me on this one, Reed. I'll just get your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts on one. If summoning these objects works, how does it work? Say Skywatcher has the dog whistle technology.
Mm-hmm.
If we all have a dog whistle and we all turn it on at the same time, are 7 billion craft appearing above everyone at the same time?
I don't know if we can trigger the response of the phenomenon like we think we can. I mean, again, it's they have a choice too, right? So it's not like a mechanistic phenomena where if we do X, it responds Y. So this is where I recommend to step back and to look at the most plausible explanations for why this engagement is taking place in the first place. I do think there are indications of planetary interest and the intention to establish a presence long term and to influence our technological course as a species. So if that was your intent, and if you had the ability to engage with people in a psychic fashion, to plant thoughts, to engender trust, build a relationship, um, possibly have people, re-express or re-communicate certain things you want them to affect the information space, then I think that's, then a kind of a psionic engagement is plausible. But they don't want to be seen and perceived en masse like that, apparently. And so I don't think we could summon a mass appearance event ourselves. And this is the question: is, are we summoning them or are they summoning us? Right? You putting out that signal and they appear, right? We think, oh wow, we can summon them. We have agency. We have control in this interaction. Of course, go listen to what Skywatcher has said. And they've been hit with a directed energy weapon. They've had electromagnetic interference, which is something that many field research groups have reported, that equipment goes offline the moment you begin even to think of capturing it. The moment you think to look in the binoculars, the thing disappears. And that's not just one person or an anecdote. That's a pattern. And
Mm.
so, who's calling who in this interaction? What information are they gaining from us? Right? Is there some sort of psychological kind of surveillance or information collection taking place? Are they looking for certain populations that have a certain specific profile? Like if you were, herding if you were the cattle herder and you look at the herd, you see, an animal that has the best physical attributes that you want to replicate forward in terms of new lineages, you have that bull or that female mate with another, right? That's not even hybridization, right? That's just preferring traits over through selection. And so is there some effort to shape the nature of the human species over a very long game approach by selectively engaging with certain groups, certain ethnicities, certain psychological profiles over time? That's what we do with other forms of life.
Yeah.
And if another form of life came here and had dominance technologically over us and wanted to steer us, whether in our interest or not, I would imagine selectively engaging and different populations and possibly having certain groups go farther than others would lead to those preferred outcomes.
Yeah, I wonder from a human perspective, similarly, there are tribes across the world. I was talking to my little boy about this. He was watching a YouTube video and it talked about, when you get these Christian missionaries and they attempt to go and make contact with a tribe who has never seen technology. They are in the
Mm-hmm.
deepest, darkest Brazilian rainforest. And someone has the great idea, I'm going to grab this Bible and I'm going to go and talk to these people who have no concept of what I'm wearing, how I'm acting, how I'm speaking, what I'm trying to do. And they end up getting shot and killed by spears, bows and arrows and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost, how would we as a species begin to assimilate them into the Western culture? How would you take one
Yeah.
of those tribes and dump them into Manhattan and go,
Mm-hmm.
okay, let's just train you, let's teach you how to live like us? It would be nearly impossible to do that, wouldn't it?
Be very difficult. I mean, don't underestimate the long game. We always think in the short game, right? If they're not attacking us, they must be here to help us. There's been no overt hostility, therefore there can't be any hostility. And there's about 1,000 other possibilities there that are not being considered. And so, over 500 or 800 years, could we be engaged selectively? Certain groups be activated psionically, certain information infused into the human information landscape, new symbols, new memes begin to spread, religions start to absorb the concept of NHI, and that maybe other super entities are the authors of scripture, are the angels that have been seen for millennia, right? So that their reality begins to weave into our own. We recompose, in a kind of revisionist sense, human history. We revise it out of its foundations in human isolation into its potential truthful or not truthful human longstanding engagement with NHI. When I say not truthful, right, any entity can come today and say that they were the ones that we see in the ancient cave art, that they were the ones who spoke to the prophets in the Bible, etc.
Yeah.
Right? How do we verify claims like that? Well, when you look at the narrative spreading today, there are a lot of claims about how NHI are the origin of just about everything, right? So where is that coming from? So is there an attempt to kind of shape both human experience, which begins at the level of consciousness, human activity, I should say information, what we say. There's what we think, there's what we experience, and then there's the ideas that are generated from that experience, and then there's our communication of them as information. And then everything that information builds out as a civilization, right? A slow percolation and a slow and subtle reshifting of the human journey off its former footings and onto another set of footings, which we have to assess. Is that what we want to be the prevailing kind of principled truths that guide our life on Earth? So this is where we have to claim a degree of agency and psychological sovereignty in this potential interaction with other forms of intelligent life.
I grabbed this next question off of the YouTube comments from Peanut and Jelly. Asked, is a non-human origin soul inhabiting an earth body human? Just curious what you think. So that idea that the soul is something else
Right.
inside this kind of meat sack.
Right. I mean, in my ontology and my spirituality, I think it's absolutely possible that what we are, being beyond body and brain and even mind, even the kind of like the conditioned consciousness that may exist beyond our body and our brain, could be not fully could not be bounded, may not be bounded only in human terms. So have we lived lives elsewhere? Possibly. We might wake up and find ourselves in a metropolis when we thought we were sleeping in the middle of nowhere. And so then what is our relationship spiritually to those other forms of life? Is it really, are we living on the other side of concrete walls and we've literally never seen them, never been over there, never been them, right? So I think that's an expanded sense of human spirituality and the divine that is very important. Functionally, however, I do think we should be mentally disciplined in how we imagine NHI inhabiting us, right? So, and this is part of the problem with disclosure is how do you disclose? This is a question to the viewers. How do you disclose the presence of human-looking non-humans, right? Because from what I'm hearing, that may be a reality. There may be human-looking non-humans. Does that mean that there was, this whole soul containerizing thing of, an NHI soul was placed inside of a human body and mind as part of some kind of abduction procedure? What does that mean? Is there a hybridization program? How long-standing is it? Is there one program or several? Right. And so, these are possibilities that extend logically, actually, from the acknowledgement of presence, not just existence of NHI, but presence on Earth. If they're present here, have they affected our genetic lineages such that we have expressed on multiple pathways, and that there are now multiple types of humans on Earth? It's a logical extension of the acknowledgement of presence. So I think it's worth considering. So I don't know quite if the viewer is asking this at a kind of a theological level or at an urgent kind of tactical level. But unfortunately, I think, at the tactical level, that may be possible.
No, thank you for that. Algo says, thank you, Reed, for coming back to the show. I have two questions and hope you've got time for both. I'll be the judge of that, Algo, but I'm sure Reed has time for both. First one, do you think it would be better for us if there were one or more NHI factions to deal with?
That's a good question. I've never been asked that before. Um, well, for better or worse, I don't think we're going to be asked. I think, by all accounts, there are multiple physical morphologies, possibly, well, definitely differing, multiple differing intents. I'm not sure it's a rainbow, right? It might be a 2 or 3 colored intent versus a rainbow of intent. Would it be easier for us? Yes, to have one entity to engage with. I would say probably. One form of life to figure out, one set of intentions to decode, one set of diplomatic arrangements, one information sharing, resource sharing, kind of regime to work out. Multiple becomes very difficult, and also discerning friend from foe becomes difficult. Discerning in a false flag scenario, if NHI are flying each other's flags, how on earth will we be able to decode that? And so it becomes almost, this is a question, is how would we ever be able to corroborate the claims made by any physically engaging NHI, right? Given their ability, apparently, low observability and cloaking, it's one of the 5 observables, right? So if they can cloak, I could imagine they could fly a different flag, right? And we have heard in the history that UAP craft have apparently been able to spoof or mimic prosaic craft. And so could they mimic each other's craft? I mean, gosh, come on, folks, right? Almost certainly they could. So this is for the policy side of the conversation. How do you manage internationally, in the human interest, the presence and prolonged activity of non-human technological, biological entities, considering all of the potential hazards that ensue? Everything from, bacterial or viral biome of a non-human origin entering the Earth system, influencing technology, making transactions with certain rogue states on Earth. It's almost the list. It's a laundry list. And so, one of the potential policies that may have to be considered is a forcible remove and reset of non-human craft from the human Earth system until such time as there's an international, regime in place to interface diplomatically with whatever this presence is.
That's fair. Algo expands then. He says, question 2. In your model for NHI contact, you seem to envision that a treaty between us and NHI would be negotiated between treaties like treaties between nation states. I'll suggest another scenario. What if NHI choose another approach that unfortunately was adopted in imperialism and colonialism? That is, to co-opt the local elites in order to exert their control. That would be easier for them because then they would not have to deal with the complexity of humanity at large, but would have to deal only with a few that can essentially be bought with access to power, technology, or wealth. How should we react if we were to learn that elites of any government were being co-opted by NHI?
Great question. And I actually do not think it would make sense for the NHI to engage NATO or the UN or the EU or the World Health Organization. From what I understand, that has not happened. There has been no, to my knowledge, overture made to intergovernmentals. There have been overtures made to governments, and more specifically, non-governmentals, not the intergovernmental organizations. So I would say it's in our best interest to take this to the intergovernmental space, to take this to the floor of the United Nations. And I do hope that the current administration, through whatever disclosures they make, drive it into the lap of that entity and others like it. So that's on our side. On their side, it's an important thought experiment. If you wanted, again, to establish permanent presence, to secure lines of influence with the least amount of energy inputs and infrastructure required, with the highest chances of success and low detectability, without raising the ire or the reactivity of the local population, what do? And that is the colonial model, right? Now, some would say, well, these are non-human entities. They're not going to do what we do. And I contest that point. If you're a non-human in a human space, and you're trying to enact a human outcome, you might do what humans do. You might use the playbook. You might use psychological operations, right? Information shaping operations. You might use some of the insights from the colonial era in which a small exploratory resource-driven group like the Dutch East India Company, would set up a small forward operating base, a foothold on a new continent, and begin to influence leadership, would begin to hybridize in the sense of interbreed with the locals, and would exploit local division and vulnerabilities and local religious customs, and begin to really install a new operating system on top of that chaotic breakdown of whatever indigenous belief system existed, right? So to install a new book of scripture, a new book of origin, etc. So I mean, those are tried and true tactics, and if we've been observed for a long time, even back into the 18 or 1700s, all of that would have been seen, and its success would have been noted. Colonialism was almost universally successful in the local environments in which it took place. There was Ethiopia, standout countries like that, or Japan, that by and large resisted colonial expansion for a period. There were brief and intermittent revolutions against colonial power, like in Haiti. But by and large, it was a very successful playbook. So, are we seeing any sort of subversive activity at play? By the nature of it being covert, not overt, we would have to look for it to see it. It's not going to show itself to us in broad daylight.
Interesting. This one is from an anonymous listener. Hi, Reed. So many abductions touch on out-of-body experiences and the consciousness topic, as well as traumatic experiences. If these NHI are ambivalent or malevolent, why would they be bringing that stuff up? Is it a tool to manipulate us, or are they trying to enlighten us? Also, why do abductions often conclude with apocalyptic warnings? If the abductees are meant to forget their experience completely, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah, great question. I don't think anything in the patterned activity of UAP suggests ambivalent intent. It's a word I've actually never considered as a plausible scenario. I think it's highly intentful activity. Malevolent, as those who follow my work know, I don't recommend kind of an evil or malevolent, kind of like black and white dichotomy. I think detrimental beneficial is a much better way to frame it. Because then we're talking about human outcomes, not the consciousness or cognition of NHI. So I don't do the benevolent, malevolent thing. I look at beneficial, detrimental, and the rule stick as regards to a set of commonly held human values and principles, like security, stability, and sovereignty, and we can then judge UAP activity against that. Why would there be the activation of an NDE or out-of-body experience? I'm not an expert in that field, so I can only speculate as to why that happens and exactly how it happens. But again, if you want to give an individual an identified person who's been identified for whatever reason, again, ethnicity, nationality, religious disposition, psychic abilities, if you want to give that person an overwhelming experience that in a sense rewrites the operating system, replaces their former belief structure with a new one, which I've talked to a number of abductees whose lives were utterly changed through one encounter. They've never been the same since. They've been psychically much more active, much more intuitive, much more hypersensitive to the environment. They feel like they're getting communication all the time and that they're not really able to stop that from happening. Okay, so something has happened to irreversibly change a person's internal composition, right? Could an NDE or some sort of powerful experience be a part of, not just a consciousness raising experience, really a consciousness altering one? I think consciousness, I've heard this many times, they're raising our consciousness. Yeah, that's a statement of descriptive value to something that needs to be considered more broadly as simply an event with a powerful impact on the consciousness, period. Whether it's an uplifting one is rather subjective, right? We can make each other feel great with chemicals and other things all day long, but is the event a good one? Does it, is it lawful? That's another question. So, but yeah, so I mean there's obviously, some sort of engagement taking place that's not just physical in nature. To what end? And I would love to have a better understanding of how experiencers have been changed, and a better kind of objective way of assessing whether that's beneficial or detrimental.
Good answer. Christian asks, do you think this phenomenon is something that will stay covert, affecting 1 or 2% of the population, as it's done mostly for our history? Or will it climax at some point where it will affect us all? Today we see mystery drones affecting many airports, and back during the December flap, people were freaking out. What's your take?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would not be surprised if the phenomenon goes into latter phases. There seems to be a phased approach to humanity, and it seems to be walking in step with the technological strides that we're making, as well as the shifting nature of power, great power competition over technology and data. Let's be two of those main variables. So would it go into a more overt demonstration of presence? Well, if you can begin to bound a zone of probable explanations for intent, you can begin to ask the question, well, would they want to do a mass appearance? Now, presently, a mass appearance would probably cause humanity to come together, to bind together, and to begin to scrutinize the non-human activity more closely. I'm not sure that's what the phenomenon would want, right? And so, how does broad blanket human awareness of them, not just again existing or being present, but being active in the world, benefit any kind of effort at a long game, long range, um, you know, effort to establish presence and to influence human outcomes? I don't see it doing that. I would not personally anticipate a mass appearance event unless it was used in response to human-driven disclosures that were not desirable. So that'd be my take.
Yeah. I don't know. I I think if you go along the lines of the phenomenon being one thing, then perhaps I think that has to come into it. But if you then look at different
Yeah.
factions, multiple phenomena at play, there would have to be this grand plan. And it does start to get into Galactic Federation territory if you go down that route, very Star Trek, that they're all speaking
Mm-hmm.
together, they're all working on this. Let's take humanity through these stages of evolution, like industrial revolutions and then technological revolutions, biological revolutions. I don't see that being the case.
Yeah.
Perhaps there is that one dominant NHI body, another that's kind of there or in the midst.
Yeah.
Not to spoil it, but
I
you
mean,
mentioned
if
the
I may,
sky. Go on, yeah.
I just want to clarify, like, yeah, I do not see the phenomenon as one thing, and I do not see the NHI as one force or one group. And so, I'm specifically talking about ETI right now,
Mm,
extraterrestrial intelligence. So, non-terrestrial, physical, biological, non-human entities. And this appearing multiracial, multi-species, organized kind of composition that's been reported by many experiencers, seeing different classes of beings together doing different functions. And so, in my view, if I think of an interstellar space where these forms of life have been evolving for a very long time, where it's almost like we're going from an island reality to a continental one. On an island, it's just you and your own. On a continent, there's been interaction, mixing, melding, competing,
yeah.
collaborating for potentially millions of years. I would imagine that life out there has found a way to hierarchically structure the way it works. So it's not a free for all. And I wouldn't imagine engaging humanity would be a free for all where there's hundreds of NHI and they're all doing whatever they want with no impact on each other. If that were the case, I think we would actually see a lot more conflict in the air of different craft competing for space and for access, and not really caring if we humans saw what they were doing and woke up to it. There seems to be much more careful, again, deep, penetrating approach to engaging humanity that keeps hard evidence out of public purview, that covers tracks very effectively, that selectively identifies human partners, cultivates them, builds an apparatus in a human apparatus to manage those persons' access and information to what the phenomenon is. And that's what we see, right? So we don't see a chaotic free for all. We see a very carefully and precisely engineered kind of engagement. Now, some would say, well, no, psychically, it seems to be more of a free for all. And that's our subjective kind of personal take, right? But collectively, the airwaves are not on fire with, millions of people saying they're having dreams about aliens every night, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people probably are having those kinds of dreams, but the way that they express that, how they, transmit that seems to be kind of like a very careful process. So somebody asked, why do many experiencers report being shown a vision of planetary destruction or of
Hmm.
great floods, great fires, etc. You could take that in one of two ways. You could say, okay, well, they're warning us of the outcomes of our human activity on Earth, left unrestrained. They're trying to impress upon us the risk of our human activity, and I think that may be at play. On another side, it's creating a powerful emotional experience that bonds you to the other entity and to whatever other information that they are conveying to you, right? So they're
Yeah.
putting you in a state of fear, like a highly fearful state, where you are potentially more receptive to information and may enter into an attachment syndrome with the entity that has, sorry, but by all accounts, kidnapped you. I mean, you're in a state of being kidnapped when they show this to you. So any good information you have to take with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I think sometimes people forget the word abduction, what it actually means, and the connotations of it. It's almost like, oh, I've been taken by some entities. Yeah, you've been abducted. It's
Yeah.
like you say,
I mean,
kidnapping.
let's broaden the lens as well. And let's just acknowledge that if the abduction phenomenon is real, it is a sub phenomenon of a missing persons phenomena.
Yep.
So it's people are going missing, some are returned. And those individuals, if they come into conscious recollection of the experience, are an abductee, right? But
Yep.
we do not understand the full nature of who's being taken from the earth or into facilities at the bottom of the ocean or elsewhere. What is done to them? What if people resist? What if they are deemed non-compliant or not good subjects of study? What if there are unexpected medical implications of whatever is done, right? Mistakes. So, you know, that's a question. And we have really, when you look at human trafficking and the disappearance of human civilization, human civilians, it's endemic globally. It's not well understood. There are many different criminal groups involved in human trafficking globally, and so, if you wanted to disappear humans in a systematic fashion, it's pretty much a free for all. You could take as many people as you would ever want, and we would have very little information or knowledge of that.
We'll finish up kind of going a bit full circle back to Age of Disclosure, a bit of David Grush. Dave Smethurst has been in touch and sent me a list of questions. Dave, I've picked a couple of these to finish up with, so thank you very much. First one, Dave says, I think that it's entirely possible that the Legacy program has developed a whole range of resources and capabilities, both defensive power and infrastructural, based on
Mhm.
recovered NHI tech. They also may have treaties with NHI that govern the deployment of such tech, plus more adversarial relationships. How does Reid plan to incorporate this possibility into his investigations?
Yeah, I think at this point, at this stage in the game, the non-human and the human have come together in ways that would shock us if we really truly knew the dimensions of that. I did take note in the documentary. I can't remember who said it, but I wrote down the quote: "The Legacy program is in a long-standing war with other nations." Which, think about that: a non-nation state, non-state actor, the Legacy program, is in war with other nation states. So, if that's the case, we need to seriously examine our current over 90 hot conflicts on Earth. Look at combat zones. Look at mercenary organizations. Look at who and what is fueling these armed conflicts. And to understand the dimensions that may be at play regarding recovering crashed vehicles, undermining certain nations' technological advances from reverse engineering efforts. It's an absolute mess. It's going to be highly complex, and to fully suss it out would be very difficult. Which is why I think stepping back and broadening the lens from legacy program, U.S. government, etc., and looking at the whole species engagement taking place and devising broad solutions that can then trickle down into very complex political arenas. I think is going to be necessary. If we stay stuck within one political arena, you're no longer talking to, that of others, and you may inadvertently fuel one competitive angle over another. And so yeah, I'm of course a huge supporter of restoring federal oversight, of declassifying overclassified information and protecting whistleblowers. And it's my hope that at least this government can gain control over this shadow world, this permanent state that's been created, fueled unlawfully with taxpayer funds to keep secret realities that really must not be secret. I mean, and to those who are inside those worlds who think, no, we can keep this secret and win the war, you can't. I'll just say that. I know you can't. And I know you're trying. I know there are groups deep within the US military apparatus who are trying to fight the phenomenon. You will not win without public acknowledgement and public involvement. The citizenry have got to be a part of this. Otherwise, they will be won by other forces, whether foreign adversary, human or non-human. Others will wage an information war on the US population, and you can think you can down craft, but somebody else wins hearts and minds. And so for our own leadership to abandon winning hearts and minds and to be so cagey and so cynical as to think that they can either fight this in private or be rewarded in private by working with the phenomenon, I think is delusional and dangerous. And so that's why I, and I know many others in my network, are ardent advocates for full disclosure of this to the public and to the global public. So I think there are so many compelling factors. I'm aware of some. I'm sure others have other parts of the story. But this has to go global. It has to go full society, and I would say relatively soon.
Yeah, I think that idea of the legacy program, it's almost a disarming name for it. That it's a room, it's a boardroom that you could go in. If you find it, you can lock it up, you can destroy the filing cabinets, you can throw the chairs away,
Right.
you can revoke the access, and perhaps it be better. And I hope I'm getting this right, Reed, and some of what you're saying as well. But even my own thinking, is it almost better to think of the legacy program as a small rogue nation where
Right.
there's no border. It can go where it wants. People have unmarked passports. They have
Right.
unlimited capital. They have their own defense. They have their own ammunitions, their own equipment, their own technologies. They are without classification systems, without law, and it's not just a small group who are keeping a UFO secret. It is almost that breakaway civilization idea that
Right.
is so powerful that we underestimate when folks are asking a Chris Mellon, a Lou Elizondo, a Jay Stratton, just naming names. You're fighting a legacy program that we really don't comprehend what exactly they're up against.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm curious, legacy to what? What is the modern program? And
Yeah,
is there some sort of demarcation being spoken to in that? Because yes, it sounds highly antiquated when, to my knowledge, it's still very active. I mean, when Lou Elizondo says in the film that a committee of 27 individuals were tasked with silencing Dave and himself, I think that is true. And so, what kind of a committee is that? And are those committee heads? Are those the puppets? Those are the agency leads
they were
in
appointed. Yep,
right inside government, appointed from outside government.
yep,
And so, how much has this disgusting digestive system externalized itself from the host entity and is now consuming things out in the wild and using the host, the government, the elected government, as kind of an avatar to do its work? It's kind of a dark image to imagine, but yeah, I mean, does it have its own military capabilities, its own airports, its own aircraft?
yep.
I took note in the documentary, the comments by a former FAA lead. Well, actually, his comments, but I think it was Jay Stratton who said that the FAA intentionally does not seek to identify craft that are not putting off a prosaic transponder signal, a signal to say, I'm an aircraft of
Hmm.
this type, this model, make, etc. If they're not putting it out, they intentionally do not detect that craft. I think of the statements by Jim Shell out of the U.S. Space Force and Missile Space Command recently on LinkedIn, talking about a control system put in place to obfuscate our space-based observing capabilities to potentially intentionally not find UAP. So
Yep.
it's like, has this program, this rogue actor or nation state essentially installed into the operating system of our government, maybe multiple key software that works against its own ability to run processes and to basically, because that has to be done. I mean, if UAP are transiting the Earth to the scale of thousands per year, thousands of transits, it might actually be way higher than that. How do you keep NASA, the FAA, all the Space Missile Command community from not seeing that? We have to install almost like noise canceling technologies, right, to cancel out the detection of that information. So it would blow our minds to know how far and how deep this goes. That's my sense. Fighting it on its terms, it's going to be a losing battle. I think, we've seen that since 2017. You see that in the exasperation of Lou and others in the documentary and the congressional reps involved. They're exasperated. They just can't take this any farther. And so then what do we do? What agency have we not yet claimed? And that's where citizen advocacy is very important, citizen science, the international conversation, basically, taking this outside the purview of whatever that rogue actor might be and triggering events that are outside their ability to control. That's, I think, very important.
Yeah, so there's also even a possibility within that, not to go to science fiction, that some of the UAP interactions are actually the UAP themselves looking for this legacy program, this rogue state, because it's capturing their craft, it's performing experimentation, it's acting outside the bounds of any treaties that it should have.
Right.
And maybe the phenomenon itself or aspects of the UAP phenomenon are struggling to find the folks involved in this.
Possibly. I mean, I think there's a collaborative infrastructure that's been built. I think obviously with that would be an oppositional one as well. I can't imagine it's all or nothing. I think of the three body problem scenario, of a rogue actor sending out a technological transmission, and then what they trigger is the arrival of something we would never want. Well, the legacy program is poking the belly of some beast. And, we've heard from actually a variety of whistleblowers talk of NHI retaliation. Those are the words they use, that NHI have retaliated or intend to, or that they're coming to recover technology and bodies from these organized groups that have claimed them. I mean, so regardless of intentions on both sides, that's a hazard, right? If there is a non-human force inbound due to the activities, the rogue activities of certain small groups who have done things that violate whatever it is, local laws or exopolitical ones, and that there's going to be some kind of kinetic engagement that results from that, that's a crisis. I mean, that is a threat. And so, this is why I do respect the work of those who have been cracking the nut on the cover up. I'll be having Matt Ford and Chris Sharp on my show Emergent this Friday live. So bring your questions because they've done some really good work, kind of beginning to penetrate and the nature of the cover up and look at its overall structure and ask the right questions. So, it's the legacy program is a threat. Whatever they are bringing or triggering, or the reactions that they're causing from the non-human side, may be a threat. It's going to be very complex to unravel this.
Dave's second question was, in the age of disclosure, it's asserted that NHI are regularly surveilling our military and nuclear capabilities in a way a potential adversary would. Why does Reid think they continue to do this? Surely they know all they need to know. Is it performative for Earth's governments, or is it mainly linked to changes in nuclear deployment which have the potential to put their undersea and underground infrastructure at risk, or something else entirely?
Great questions. Great thinking. I think any display of technology in a way that we can detect and that they know we can detect is a potential show of force. I heard recently that one of the biggest, most overt drone swarm events to take place actually happened recently in Texas, very recently. And so, all of these flyovers of the flight lines of our most sensitive military aircraft, I don't know. It looks like a show of force to me. And if you want to control the decisions of a federal government that intends to disclose potentially against the will of the legacy program and whatever its non-human collaborative infrastructure is, what do you do? How do you intimidate that administration? Well, you cause daytime mass sightings that force that administration to credibly disclose to the public. But what if it can't do that? What if it's not ready to do that? What if it's out of phase with its own plans to do that, right? So
Mm.
you drive a wedge between citizens and government such that when they do ultimately disclose, people won't believe it. They'll believe that's the psychological operation. And so if I were that force and I was seeing disclosure coming down the pipeline, I would trigger those crises of confidence between citizenry and governments to blunt the impact of the disclosure when it comes. Are they still surveilling our nuclear deployments? Possibly. Are they worried that we could enter a nuclear confrontation over Ukraine, for example, or in some sort of altercation in the South China Seas? Possibly. I don't think we are outside the bounds of nuclear war, right? In fact, many would say we're as close to it as we've been in probably 20 years.
Mm.
So, does the detonation, I mean, it's possible the detonation of nuclear weapons and the development of nuclear energy is what prompted a next phase of the engagement to take place back in the mid 1940s. So if we're getting closer to a nuclear confrontation, even a small tactical one, I would imagine the phenomenon would be present and watching. And I think actually looking for anomalous activity over conflict zones and over installations with forward deployed nuclear warheads would be very fruitful citizen-led detection work.
I think there's an element, an argument that, for example, the Tic Tac objects or some of these NHI craft being drones of non-human origin. I'm not saying foreign adversarial technologies, but they are picking up an increase in or change in our technologies, how they are powered. So, the Nimitz Princeton was a nuclear powered aircraft carrier
Mm-hmm.
strike group. They have nuclear weaponry potentially on board. So that would then draw up these drones if they're based, let's just go purely hypothetical. They are based underwater. They can produce these things en masse, go up and keep an
Mm-hmm.
eye on those. You then have these nuclear strike groups all across the world. You have these bombers constantly in the air. You have them under the water and
Nuclear
various different
submarines
submarines.
nuclear submarines being tracked by
Yep.
very large vehicles underwater moving very fast.
And
Yeah.
then all these conflict zones. So look at Ukraine, Russia. You're not telling me that US and China do not have hundreds, if not thousands, of various spy drones and whatnot. Again, with maybe all different kind of signatures or propulsion methods. I'm not saying anti-gravitics, but different ways to keep things in the air for a long time. Again, potentially some form of nuclear energy. And again,
Mm-hmm.
that draws these objects in because there's just an automatic system where non-human entities that were here a long time ago or are still here are keeping an eye on the planet. And the way to do that is send these things out whenever you see a nuclear signature, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean they're probably responding to techno signatures put off by nuclear power, and I don't know how it works, but whatever signatures a nuclear warhead puts off, or they've already basically surveilled the full capabilities set and they're just monitoring deployment and
Mm.
location for instantaneous intelligence. Um, it's obviously we're under some form of surveillance. Is it the preparation of the battle space, as Lou Elizondo has called it? Is it the ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance activities of what we would normally see from a foreign adversary? From what I've seen, it does comport to that in some ways. And the question is then, okay, so they are surveilling these operations. How would they ultimately intervene? The word intervention is coming up a lot these days. That's a word that my father, Marshall Summers, has been using for well over 30 years. And it's interesting to see a lot of people talk about intervention into our nuclear capabilities, intervention to stop nuclear hostilities, or more recently, intervention into our conflict between us and them up above. So, how would they intervene? What would the mechanism look like? Interesting. I'll just anecdotally, I don't like to talk about Hollywood movies very often in the context of this phenomenon because it's overdone and it doesn't help. But I do think a lot of signaling to the public has taken place in the mainstream media and out of Hollywood. And, I recently watched this film, The House of Dynamite, which is on Netflix. And whew, man, great film. But the fundamental narrative twist is that something happened in our space observing systems to disable us from identifying the point of origin after the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile at a US city. So basically, ICBM gets launched, it's detected, but for some reason, there's missing information as to where it was launched from, which means the US cannot fire back, right? And so that's the ultimate death knell to nuclear deterrence, to mutually assured destruction. And again, I don't want to draw a line of connection because I don't know if there is one. I really don't. But I go back to those comments by Jim Shell about a control system put in place to obfuscate our space-based observing capabilities. And I say, well, by golly, if somebody wanted to prevent the US from firing back, that'd be a great way to do it. And so, our is a non-human intelligence not just monitoring, but basically preparing the mechanisms by which they would prevent an effective exchange, or would allow one country to fire and not the other, or to use basically that scenario to declare their presence in peaceful manner, to say, look, we just saved 5 million lives by stopping that warhead. So who wants to talk? Clearly, you guys are warlike and unable to govern yourselves. How about talking to us? We have solutions. Do you need solutions? Or you have a climate crisis you can't fix, right? We can geoengineer. We can for sure bring the environment back to what it was. AGI is out of control. It's running your entire societies to catastrophic levels of uncontrollability. Well, talk to us because we have all of that infrastructure ready to install. Little do we know that they helped bring us to that point, to that brink of the loss of human control. I'm not saying that's the case, but I think that's a plausible scenario where, what's driving us in the direction of these anti-human, these fundamentally against the human interest kind of type decisions. Well, something might be doing it that's non-human in origin. This rapid race to AGI, which by some estimates will cause a global collapse because it will run out of control. And I mean, what is fueling that? What is fueling that anti-human activity?
Reed, what I'm going to do is ask you, I'm going to ask you one more question, but I'm going to keep that for the folks on the Patreon and stuff like that who pay for the podcast as a thank you. There's a Black Friday offer on just now for folks who want to sign up, and it's half price for your first month or first year. So thank you to everyone who does support the podcast financially. So if you're watching on the free feeds or listening on the free feeds, I'm being a scumbag and cutting you off now, but you've had a good 2 hours of content with the wonderful Reed Summers. Reed, just before we leave the good folks on the free feeds, do you want to just let them know how they can find you, how they can find your work?
Yeah, for sure. I'm the host of Emergent, a podcast where I examine the potential interface between non-human and human. So I've got great guests. I do a lot of original analysis on the show. So head over to Emergent. You can subscribe to the show and get notifications when I go live, which I do quite often. I'm also working on supporting the UAP Summit, uapsummit.org, which will be a groundbreaking forum for citizen-led detection and tracking of UAP. So you'll definitely want to be a part of that and hearing about those new advances. I'm also the chair of the Investigating NHI Forum, which is hosted by the Human Institute. We're gearing up for a lecture by Dr. Gary Nolan, looking at the research roadmap for actually researching the fundamental existence of non-human intelligence. These are original presentations, original thought leadership by the best minds in the field. So you can head over to humaninstitute.org/NHI. to join those. They're all free and open to the public.
Awesome. Well, if you're leaving this there, folks, thank you so much for joining us for this over 2 hours now with Reed Summers. Wonderful to speak to. And I think for me, Reed, there's a lot of originality in what you say, a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of original concepts. And I think this topic is filled to the brim with ideas and discussions that haven't taken place yet. I think
Yeah.
there's an abundance of regurgitating similar conversations and whatnot out there. But you're not someone I feel who does that. And it's always a joy to listen to you, your guests, your shows, and also to have you on and speak to
Thank
me.
you.
So thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate that a lot.
Cheers, mate. Well, if you want to sign up for the paid podcast, folks, free trials on Apple, free trials on Patreon, loads of offers and stuff. Same on YouTube. Stick with us. And I've got one more question for Reed. And I'll ask you that now, Reed. So here we are
Right.
with the good folks who pay for the podcast and all that good stuff. So Dave Smethurst had one more question. He said, for me, Dave Grush's revelations were a step change in our understanding of the NHI issue and helped us develop a much clearer focus on what was likely true and areas we needed to focus on. No more fence sitting. To what extent
Mm-hmm.
does Reed agree with this, and what impacted what Grush revealed impact his approach in terms of analysis and policy development?
Yeah, well, David Grush's comments at the 2023 hearings, House Oversight, was groundbreaking for me. It's actually one of the main things that called me into this field professionally, because I saw these statements being made on the record by a former acting official, I believe in the Defense Intelligence Agency, part of the UAP task force, and he was advancing this beyond the kind of the cagey level of, well, they might be craft, but they might be phenomena. They might be anomalous phenomena, not even craft, right? Which is walking back our forward line of public understanding.
Yep.
David Grush has walked it forward. And we saw that even on the Fox News interview from a few days ago, talking about the biological sentience piloting these craft. Those are front foot statements that go even beyond the comments in 2023 about biologics being recovered with some of these crashed vehicles. I've been involved in this field for most of my life. I remember walking the halls of Congress almost 20 years ago, passing out an information packet to congressmen on this topic. Like I have been doing this. Has been a big part of my life. So to see someone courageously step forward and to basically look left, look right, the consequences will be what they are. Say it like it is. I greatly appreciate that. And so, someone has to set that high watermark, and I believe David Grush has. And I think he's been acting in the best interests of the public the whole way, and steering clear of some of the more factional disputes and efforts to gain whatever it is, popularity, profit, book deals, what have you, to do the right thing. And I've talked to Dave. I've talked to a lot of the folks in this field, Lou and Carl and others. I've had conversations with all of them. And I've taken their various perspectives and differing levels of experience on this issue into the hopper of how I assess the phenomenon and its intent. So a lot of inbound signals. My effort is to help people think through this logically and in a grounded fashion that gets them down the road out of the confusion of it could be anything, it could be everything, to it's probably one of a few things.
Mm.
And then once you identify that small cluster of probable scenarios, then you do what I'm seeking to do, which is you go get the data. You go find out if abductions are actually happening. You go get aerial intelligence and begin to map the confluence of UAP activity on top of experiencer accounts to understand, are UAP converging in a certain place, impacting real people, real minds, right? That's almost impossible to do if you're still entertaining unidentified anomalous phenomena as a catch-all for pretty much anything and everything that exists beyond our five senses and the physical plane of life. So I'm excited to engage other citizen advocates and activists who want to lead that edge out further. That's what my work is about. That I've developed a platform called Forerunner for people who want to be a part of that leading edge, even out ahead of what we're hearing in the last week or so. So I think there's a lot an engaged citizenry can do on this issue. And I think there's actually a tremendous risk of a disengaged and disinformed citizenry on this issue. It's actually catastrophic if that's the case.
If you'll give me one follow-up on that, because you've been with me for so long now, Reed, I appreciate your time. I put a lot of faith and trust in David Grush's words and his actions and what he has said, and also what he hasn't said, but tried to, I think, nod towards at times. Like you say, to go from biologics came with some of the craft back at the hearing in 2023 to 2 years later, biological sentience, there's quite a big leap adding that attachment on to the end of that.
Huge.
And for me, that's why I would love to speak to a David Grush to dig into those types of what's happened in the 2 years that you're allowed to say that, or you've been able to say that.
Yeah.
For me, though, or for you, what gives you faith that David Grush is not being or wasn't being potentially played by folks in the legacy program, that everything he says may be true to his knowledge, but he could have been fed disinformation, misinformation, he could have been exposed to dummy programs? What gives you that faith or trust?
Well, definitely in speaking with him personally, I think as a human being, getting a sense of where he's coming from and the concern that he has, not just for the government and its interests and et cetera, but actually for what humanity needs done in this. So I think there's a human level to that. He is an intelligence officer, and those folks are pretty good at knowing when they're being played, and guarding against that leverage. So that's a component. And then also that, his assessments and his statements on the record, they comport to what I believe we can observe about the phenomenon. I mean, he's not asking us to believe in something for which there is no data, right? There is data for this. It's not take it on my word. It's use this as an indicator and then go look at the data yourself. And so, whenever anything is corroborated by the observables, not just of UAP, but of NHI, which no one talks about the 5 observables of NHI. Go to my course on alien intent if you're interested in that. What are the observables, right? Well, whenever their statements, no matter how bold or how garish, are corroborated by those observables, I think, again, if nothing else, it puts agency in the hands of citizens. Whenever something is said that we could never corroborate, that could never be substantiated, right? That NHI created, the Christian faith, or the Christian faith is an NHI engineered piece of cultural infrastructure. Okay. How do you back up that claim, right? And so it's a just believe type statement. We can't just believe. It's not. We're beyond that now. And if you want people to be really credibly engaged in this, they have to be able to have their own set of findings. And so, that's where I stand with it.
Awesome. Well, Reed, thank you again so much for your time. I'd love to have you back on a regular basis, to be honest. You're great to speak with, and there's so many things that, as we're talking, I'm like, I want to bring this up, but we don't have time.
I have my good days and my not so good days, and I've got so many plates in the oven, and working on a book right now as well, on intent. So that'll be a great conversation to have when that's out.
Awesome. And of course, if not before then, I'd love to have you on after the summit to ask how that goes, speak about that, and find out kind of what's coming from that. So again, thank you a lot for your time.
All right, Andy, great to see you. Thanks for the conversation.
That's all for this episode of That UFO podcast. Thank you so much for listening and watching. If you enjoyed the show, please follow, subscribe, and leave a rating or review wherever you get your podcast. It really helps others find the show. If you're watching on YouTube, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. You can also support the show directly and get early access, ad-free episodes, and bonus content on Patreon, or by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube memberships. All the links are over at thatufopodcast.com or in the show description below, along with merchandise and more. Don't forget you can also pick up a copy of my book, Atlas of Unidentified Flying Objects, available now in all good bookstores and through online retailers, including Amazon. Big thank you again to all of you for listening and tuning in. Until next time, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little Baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue.